Ooh, trains. Unfilled trains. Let's see. Maybe this one will be better. Anybody remember Thomas the Tank Engine? Really? Oh, my kids love that thing. I spent way too much money on it. Let me see if I can find my other one here. Yep. One that might be working on this time period. This one might be better. Goes along with the guys in the picture here. By Pete Seeger, one of the great folk singers. I've been working on the railroad. Probably have it on your Spotify list. All the live long day. Maybe not. Anyways. So we'll get Pete Seeger off of there. Hold that on. So this is going to be the Industrial Revolution, part one, about laying down the tracks, literally laying down the tracks, the Transcontinental Railroad tracks. And hopefully this will play without any of the background music. For those of you who had been trying the other one, this is a remake because the first one had the music on it that I turned down that I couldn't hear as a recording, but supposedly it's still going on as I was listening to it. So one way or another, hopefully this will be a lot better. Again, Brandon Dell'Orto, Granby High School, advanced placement, U.S. history. And we're trying to get ourselves through this time period of isolation of sorts. So the actual amount of time period in this area, again, is the Industrial Revolution. Starts with the ending of the Civil War in 1865. It's going to go 1898. The actual Industrial Revolution itself had been going on for a long time, since the starting with really England, starting to use mass production of sorts. The idea of an industrial revolution is a pretty normal one, and most societies go through it over time, sooner or later, if they have access to capital and natural resources and all the kind of right ingredients go. So when you're going to make an industrial revolution pie, you need some basic things. For example, you need lots of natural resources around you. And they have to be fairly cheap and be able to be gotten pretty easily. For example, the iron ore can't be thousands of feet below ground. It's got to be pretty close to the ground, which England had at its benefit at the beginning. You also have to have the ability to kind of heat stuff up. So you got to have some coal, you got to have some iron ore, then you can turn into metal, lumber, then to make the factories and the frames and all that stuff, and oil. But you also have to have capital. You have to have a lot of rich people who have lots and lots and lots and lots of money, who are willing to give you the money to build the business that then you could share the profits with. It's called investment of sorts. And then you have to have a lot of government help. You got to have some banks that will then facilitate. This is the whole Alexander Hamilton kind of mindset, that you've got to have government working with big business to create jobs, create trade, create growth, to create money for everybody, and then you're going to have a happy republic. Transportation is going to be really important. You got to be able to get things from point A to point B, because probably realistically your iron ore deposits and your coal mines are not going to be right next to each other, and your lumber and your rivers for transportation or your railroads, it's going to be important to have an internal kind of functioning of trade going back and forth. Infrastructure, shall we call it. Something that Congress has been talking about fixing for a while now. And if you remember Handsome Henry Clay, it was his kind of brainchild, his baby, to create things like the Erie Canal. It wasn't his particularly, but the idea of how do we interlock ourselves? How do we get it so the business can actually interweave itself very well? And then you have to have a lot of workers. And in England, if you remember your AP European history, this was going to happen with the enclosure movement, when they decided to kick all those peasants who were barely kind of producing much food beyond what they could eat themselves, and replace them with a bunch of sheep that you could then shear for their wool. Then you could then sell the wool as fabric, and you make all kinds of money. The enclosure movement kicked a lot of people off the land, and a lot of them came to the United States in the colonial era. But this is going to be the time period in which we have America having a bunch of people coming in, looking for their 160 acres of free land. And a lot of those people will be actually farmers, and then later will migrate off the farms when they find that they can't make enough money in farming, so they'll go back to the cities to look for jobs. Very similar thing that happened in England about 150, 200, 300 years before. And then we also have to have ability to get out to then sell the stuff to the rest of the world. And obviously England has got that going for it, because England has the biggest navy in the whole world at the time period, all the way up to World War II. And so you also have to have this incredible support of the government. Now, for the Republican Party, following the Civil War, remember, they were going to build themselves as a national party. And this isn't any slam against the Republicans, because remember, the Democrats were the guys doing the KKK stuff down in the South. But the Republican Party was going to build itself off of African-American freed slaves' votes in the South. But they needed them to stay in the South so they could win the Electoral College. They could win all kinds of senators down there. But after a while of not having it work very well, 13 years or so, in 1877, the corrupt bargain number 2, you remember 2, is going to then say, Reconstruction, who really cares anymore? And blacks will be left to their own devices, and they'll have to wait another 100 years or so for the civil rights movement to come and finally give them the equality. But what happened in the North then is the Republican Party started to kind of shift its allegiance from freed slaves in the South to big business in the North, high tariffs. Don't buy from England, don't buy from France, buy from America, buy American. Why wouldn't you be patriotic and buy American? And then they also started to base themselves, you'll see this with the next lecture, 2 lectures from now, the idea of having the actual workers in the factories. The idea is very simple. If we are going to put big tariffs to help protect your jobs, then you have jobs. And remember where those jobs came from, the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln kind of a mindset. All right, well, the United States, again, has had its issue ever since most of its population has been over here on this side. And for you guys, this side. And Handsome Henry Clay, as he did his kind of like extension as things were going along, damn, really, Moses Henry Clay, you are a handsome man. Handsome Henry Clay has been able to do his American system, or at least try to get it going so that we can interlock ourselves. And that idea of having the West provide the food, the North, for the most part, provide all the textiles and all the other manufacturing, and then it's going to be along this whole kind of Rust Belt. And eventually the South is going to then do a King Continent once again. So this Handsome Henry Clay, right, don't forget the banks. This idea of the actual AP test then is going to be based on a focus of this time period really being kind of about an interlocking of all of our natural resources. Well, the first Industrial Revolution was happening already, and now it's going to be backed up with the second Industrial Revolution, which is going to be basically, let me see my flag in the background over there. God, I have my flag. And this second Industrial Revolution is really the one we're focusing on right now. So that's Industrial Revolution number 1. Industrial Revolution number 2 is going to be the big one. That's going to be the one that's going to have railroads and all kinds of stuff. And it is following in the Civil War. So they're all one. It's not as if we stopped doing technological advances in 1861 and then all of a sudden started again in 1865. But as we looked at yesterday with the interview, this is the beginning of this kind of input of actual capital, because this is the most expensive war we ever had. Now, remember back in the days of the Manifest Destiny, where we're moving across the continent, well, this way, across the continent, from sea to shining sea, to see the dancing antelope and the gazelles play, or the deer and the antelope. Why not some zebras? Somehow or another, we have this kind of movement with the Donner Party, for example. Well, as they're trying to get to California or Oregon, they have this split right there. And in that split, you're going to see the max change as America goes. Now, we talked about this before, but again, I just think this is really cool. When you think about history, sometimes it falls into place. If you were seeing this kind of evolution in 1783, when all of a sudden we get this big chunk of land, and Britain just said, bloody hell, we're so tired of this war with you. We're trying to get out of debt, and now it's so expensive. Why are we doing this? And then kind of moving to the idea of having this massive change. Well, we got all of a sudden get this land, and thanks to Thomas Jefferson, the lanky little Virginian that he was, we double our size with France selling us Sacre Bleu for $15 million, the Louisiana Purchase. Then we get John Adams and Andrew Jackson kind of pissing off the Spanish down there. They finally say, Dios mío, you can have Florida. Who wants it anyways? There's so many alligators. And then we have, in essence, Texas becomes independent, and then John Tyler at the last part of his presidency says, and he takes it, gets Congress to say so. Then in the election of 1844, we have James Knox Polk, the kind of 54-40 or fight Manifest Destiny guy. And again, 54 is the bottom part of Alaska, so he goes along. We have 49, the 49th parallel with England. And then finally after Mexico, Dios mío, again, Dos says, we don't want to fight with you anymore. In 1848, they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then we have, in essence, a big chunk of a sea to shining sea. One coast, other coast. And then finally, because we need our little railroad down there in the bottom, we end up having our Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. So if you were born in 1766, I just think this is so cool. If you were born in 1766, right around the same time period that Britain was sending the Declaratory Act, saying, bloody hell, you guys can finally have your non-stamp act. We're done. By the time you were 3 and a half, going on 4, you may have heard a little bit about the Boston Massacre. By the time you were 7, you may have heard about the Boston Tea Party. By the time you were 10, on your 10th birthday, you've been able to actually read a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And so as the war was being fought from 1775 all the way to 1783, you, in essence, could be this kid who had seen this whole thing happen. From 1776 all the way to 1783, you could have had, over the course of your lifetime, been on the verge of actually fighting this war itself. And if you decided to move later on, just to kind of go west, young man, go west, by the time you were an 87-year-old man, you could have seen this whole thing play out from sea to shining sea in your lifetime. In your lifetime. Just look across that. That is a lot of land. We're one of the biggest countries in the world when it comes to sheer landmass. Yeah, Russia, Putin, who's got it anyways. But all things concerned, in this time period, we have had the radical Republicans who have as their foundational element the idea of ending slavery, emancipation. It's going to get it, 13th Amendment. But they also had a whole bunch of other stuff they were trying to do, if you remember. They were trying to get a Transcontinental Railroad. They got it in 1762. It'll get started after this war is going along. And then they're going to get their first income tax. That's going to come back later on as the 16th Amendment passed in 1912, affected 1913. Only the top 1% or so actually got taxed at first. And then later on, we're also going to get in the same spring of 1862, our first official currency, paper money-wise. You know, the kind of big money, of which I have a lot. Ooh, ooh, look at that. Greenbacks. So we got our greenbacks coming out of the actual war. And we also get our big, huge tariff. That was the number 2 thing on the planks of the Republican Party. First was no new slavery in the territory. Second was now going to be a super high tariff. Protect American industry. Keep the factories working in America. And then you're going to get our Homestead Act. This has been part of the Free Soil Party. They've been wanting it since 1848. Even though it was only about $1 an acre of land, that's a lot of money if you're buying an entire 640 acres. We're talking about $500,000, and most poor guys who are moving west don't have it. And they're tired of actually having rich guys buy it at $1 an acre and then turn around and sell it at $100 an acre, so they just wanted their free land. We have so much, why not just give it away? Well, in 1862, they did, as part of the idea of filling that entire area with as free soil people, hoping that if they had to negotiate with the South, they wouldn't actually be forced to then have any kind of slavery out there. And then we had a contract labor law, which the factories in the Civil War were basically saying, we need some help. We're not getting enough guys. So remember how this works. We have a whole bunch of people, especially the Irish, who are still suffering from the potato famine, all of a sudden having a bunch of businesses coming from the United States coming over and saying, hey, in America, we can give you 160 acres of land for free. Like, saints be preserved. There's no possible way you can do that. And they're like, oh, yes, we can. That'd be wonderful, but I can't get there. I'm so poor, I can't even feed my family, let alone buy a ticket to the United States of America. We got a deal for you. If you want to work for our company for a year, we can get you over there. And then we also got the first conscription act. So they get here, they become American citizens, and they're welcomed with a thank you from Uncle Sam saying, you've been drafted into the United States Army. Anyways, they got that Homestead Act. And that Homestead Act is really pretty cool. Remember, an acre of land, you get 160 of them. An acre of land is basically a football field minus the end zones. I just think this is so cool, too. Look at all this stuff with technology. God bless you, Google Earth. That right there is Granite Bay High School's football field. You can tell there's nobody there because of the coronavirus kind of quarantine. But you get 160 of those things. Now, for free. All you got to do is live there for a year, 5 years. Just 5 years. Look at all that chunk of territory. Can you imagine with each of these acres going for like $100 and some odd $1,000? Or more, how much money you get if they just gave it to you for free? All you had to do was get there. Of course, there was somebody already there. That's a little bit of a go over the problem. That'll be a lecture to come up here in a little while. So in 1887, basically, we're going to more or less just say, Indians, you can't be tribes anymore. We're just going to kind of kick you off this land. We'll give you our own 160 acres if you can get it fast enough. But more or less, this has been part of the game that we'll look at in a future lecture when it comes to the idea of how did this Homestead Act affect Native Americans? Well, it affected them a lot. So those donor parties and those guys were just trying to get out there. They were just trying to get out to the West. And all they needed was some protection along the railroad line. Well, not a railroad line yet. All they needed was protection along kind of this little trail of sorts. So in 1846, we got our Mexican-American War. And all of a sudden, in 1848, we got a lot of gold discovered. And there becomes a flood of people going out. And then all of a sudden, the major job of the United States Army, about 16,000 troops at the time period, was simply to protect people going out there. That was their job, just protect them. because they don't really want to live in that Great Basin. They don't want to get run over by bison in that middle area. They just need to get out to the West Coast. So the soldiers were there to be protected. Then all of a sudden, 1861, Fort Sumter being bombed on that April 12th morning at about 5 in the morning. Now we got a war. And Lincoln, been president for about a month and 8 days. By 1861, April 2nd, April 12th, kind of says, holy mother, we're in Maryland. Maryland is, in essence, a slave state, a pretty big slave state. And they don't like me very much. So he calls the 16,000 troops back to protect the actual capital. Not all of them go. Some go back to their southern states. But by and large, all of a sudden, we have this vacuum out there in the West. And we'll talk about that later on. But basically, within about a year, Congress says, hey, just get out there. You just got to get out there. Get out there and put your flag down just Columbus style, call it yours, and then stay for 5 years, and you can have it. So there's a flood of people going out to get their actual homestead. And they are basically taking land that is the tribal land of Native Americans. And this is going to lead to the Indian Wars, but we're going to come back to that in a couple lectures. But the biggest of those, Custer's Last Stand, but that's a big thing coming up to a lecture near you. All right, so now for these homesteaders. These homesteaders basically don't have a pot to piss in, which during the coronavirus might be important because you can't find toilet paper anywhere. So you might have to actually start using pots to piss in. And if you don't have a pot to piss in, then you don't have a pot to do other things in either. And so they're going to be these hardy, feisty, just independent-minded farmers who do incredible work. These guys are willing to, look at his fingers, these guys are willing to basically build their homes out of sod. They literally just take their shovels and they dig sod up. They become these sod farmers. They're going to have to cut the sod in order to start planting wheat and corn and barley or whatever they're going to plant, because that is basically really super thick. It was called Nebraska marble. And so you'd cut it like an adobe thing, about the size of, 2 feet by about 1 foot, and you would just make these blocks. They'd be like 6 inches to 12 by 8 inches deep. And you'd have to cut through that thick patch of grass to just even get to the soil underneath it. So it wasn't just a matter of making a sod house, but why not make a sod house when you got to clear the land of the sod in the first place? And depending on how you made it, you might have a bit of a lean over here. Then you got to get up on the roof, and I don't know how that ladder has been made, but one way or another, these sod houses, if you save up enough money, you might be able to get enough money for like a window every once in a while. But here's this family of sod guys, and they're very proud of their house. They're proud of their family. They're proud of everything they've made. And not only are they proud that they've got a sod house, they've got a really strong sod house. Look at that strong sod house. They can put their horse up there. Who needs a garage when you can just park the horse in the wagon up on the top of the house? Obviously, I need a little bit more sleep, which is amazing because that's been what we can all do nowadays. Just stay home and sleep a lot. But this is not actually a sod house that's got a strong roof. This is a sod house that has been built into the bank of the mountain behind it, because that way you don't have to worry about, reinforcing a back wall. You've got the back wall and it's your hill. So the horses are basically up on it. Hopefully they don't walk out this way and come out on the horse. But these people are very proud of their houses. These are some of the independent-minded folks that the legacy of is in the Midwest of the United States, pretty much from the Rocky Mountains to the Sierra Mountains all the way to Mississippi. These are people who, for the most part, their legacy goes back to, I don't need anybody. You don't tell me that I'm going to close down my state for quarantine stuff. I'm going to stay and make my house. Look what I did back in the day. I remember when when I was a kid, we used to make our house out of mud. Son, I swear I made it with my own hand. You can see these guys talking about when Daddy made this house. Pretty impressive stuff, all things concerned. So these are those sod guys we're going to come back to in another lecture in a while. Again, as most farming families, you'd have a very large family, and then you basically would always have, let's say, workers. You could call them family slaves, but basically honor thy father and thy mother. So you better go out and plow the field like I told you to. So these farmers with their very strong roots that can hold a cow are going to be basically working during this time period. And they are going to then, if they make a little bit more money, they can buy some lumber. They can maybe make an even more sturdy house, all things concerned. But these are those people who moved out, including a handful of a few thousand blacks that were able to escape from the South and their Jim Crow Black Code, no vagrancy laws, and actually settle into Kansas. Remember, Kansas had been bleeding before. Kansas is where the true believers. So there was a lot more people living in Kansas that had come for that bleeding Kansas fight that were more, shall we say, open to the idea of black people having equality. And so a larger contingent will actually settle in Kansas during this time period. Now, these farmers are going to come out in their Conestoga wagons. The Conestoga wagons are the famous kinds you guys used to make models of or see in 4th grade when we did our kind of California history. And they were the way that you got west until the railroads and the cars. But the cars are going to come after the railroads. But the Conestoga wagon is going to be the thing that actually is going to get most of those people out in the 1840s, 1850s, and through most of the 1860s until the new advent of the railroad, the age of steam, replacing the horse and buggies and wagons. And so the railroad, in essence, is going to be the thing that had been the dream of knitting this country together. It is Henry Clay's American system on steroids with a dose of kind of protein powder to really get this thing going. Now, if you remember, this had been part of the game and gone all the way back. But by 1862, Congress in that spring session basically passed the legislation that said, we're going to allow this to happen. Now, Congress basically, in the name of the people, own all of this land. And they're going to give it to these settlers at 160 acres for free. But they're going to also give it for free to the railroads, along with lots of grants and land things. And so the railroads will start exploding across the continental United States when they're given, in essence, a chance to not only own land for free, because they get it also, but they're also going to be given grants and sometimes loans with 0% interest. Sometimes the railroad companies come to Washington, D.C., and in appreciation of these senators and congressmen helping them out, they will in essence just give them stock in these railroad companies. So I'm a senator who all of a sudden passes a railroad bill that gives thousands, maybe millions of acres of land for free to the Pacific Railroad. Next thing you know, I got to think, it's a nice fruit basket and, 600 shares of Pacific Railroad stock. It's like a win-win, no matter how you do it. But going back to the beginning of this thing, though, we actually have this movement has been going across. This is part of the story of westward migration, story of transportation, story about movement. And if you remember, New York is going to be the World Trade Center. It's going to be the place where you have world trade starting. And up the Hudson River, you go up to the Erie Canal that have been basically opened up in 1825. That then opens up all kinds of trade via water to Chicago, the second city, and it'll become this huge, big metropolis. It's our second biggest city in the United States for the longest of times. And then eventually, because of these railroads that the little giant Stephen Douglas wanted to get kind of set across his land that he had bought up there, we're going to ultimately end up having the Transcontinental Railroad. And then eventually we're going to have some northern railroads. We're going to have some southern railroads. They're going to meet there in Promontory, Utah, because that's where they're going to meet. Now, if you take a look at the red there, the red is basically the Central Pacific Railroad, and the blue is going to be the Union Pacific Railroad, named after the Union in the Civil War. Talk about marketing. They're also going to have then eventually a Southern Railroad where New Orleans is getting quarantined as we speak, and then it's going to get played across that Gadsden Purchase all the way then to San Diego and LA. And in World War II, that's going to expand that. So in World War II, we're going to end up having a whole lot of growth in these two areas, San Diego and Los Angeles over here, and then New Orleans over there. Now, in the time period, though, if you take a look at it, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific are going to be kind of racing to get their railroads built. And they're racing, not because they just like to race, because in years you don't have the Olympics, like we might not have this summer, you still want to be able to have something to do. Now, actually, they're getting paid by the mile. And so they are racing to get as much land as they possibly can. And the Union Pacific has it pretty easy at first, coming across from your angle this way, across from Nebraska, Omaha, Iowa, kind of all the way across till they get to the Rockies, and it's a little slow going. California, they start over there, and then next thing you know, they hit the actual Sierras right outside of Rockland, and that's a hard pull. But once they get up and moving, they get going pretty well. And the people that are doing the work are, hopefully you don't forget this part, most of the people, not exclusively, you got to use those soft words like most or many. Those are much simpler than saying all of the workers on the Central Pacific were Chinese laborers, or all. Those are just historically inaccurate. So don't say those kind of words. Most, many, a vast proportion of the workers on the Union Pacific were the Irish, who were not wanted in many of the cities of the East, or many, most, a vast amount of the actual laborers of the Central Pacific Railroad were the Chinese. Either of those terms are going to make it a little bit simpler and a little bit safer to do. So when we're talking about this thing, we're talking about this Transcontinental Railroad that has been basically put together by 1862's legislation, and then it comes together later of the Irish and the Chinese doing their work, but then they're not allowed to be really in the picture. You don't see any Chinese over here on this side. You don't see any Irish over on that side. So in essence, they get kind of shoved out. Then these other guys get to do their kind of clink, clink kind of a thing. Leland Stanford's going to be given the honor of hitting the actual golden spike. It's actually not a real golden spike because that gold is really kind of metal and it would have gone like that. But he put a spike in and he goes, ah! And they had a telegraph set up all the way back east to Washington, D.C. so that as soon as he hits it, it goes tick, tick, and it can say basically, hey, it's now together. We now have a railroad that is going to link up the country. He missed twice. Anyways, that's hard sometimes, but it is a very powerful moment for America, a very patriotic moment. And Captain America, who already at this time period, for those of you who are cartoon admirers, he was already like 600 years old. Remember, he had fought with Alexander the Great, and then he got frozen. Or was that World War II? Anyway, so one way or another, this is a very patriotic moment. Remember, it is a patriotic moment because of the contributions of many of the workers that were not really wanted in America, the Chinese and the Irish. This is horrible, backbreaking labor. Hundreds will end up dying in this process as they try to put these things together. Now, we're not very happy with the Irish at the time period. Sorry, Abby, but we're not very happy with the Irish at this time period. They are often referred to as the Black Irish. In other words, the black people of the North, the workers that no one wants. And the Chinese, kind of sometimes called coolie labor or gooks, those come later actually, this time period in 1898. But basically, the Chinese are not very well liked either. They're very cheap labor. They're coming from some other areas. So what you have in these political cartoons are often this element, this idea, these people who are not wanted here. Look at Oregon, the Mr. Oregon guy up here, like shooting off these Chinese and trying to get them to go back to China. Lady Liberty, now kind of all decked up for war, is basically looking at trying to lock these people up in 1892. All right, so you need to know the term WASP. You got to be able to use the WASP, White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. Now, WASP is a term you have to have memorized, and you got to be able to use it when you're writing. You have to be able to reference it. It's not a bad idea to then sneak in like the next sentence, the idea of these Protestants or something like that. These were theoretically at the time period of the 1880s, 1890s, these were the ideal Americans. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. Now, this is what basically God is, right? I've seen the pictures. Sistine Chapel. God is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. You can tell. It's right there. You can see it on the wall. I mean, they wouldn't lie in art, would they? So one way or another, they have this idea of the fear of the time period is that the Irish over here and the Chinese over here are going to literally eat up America. They're going to take us over. The white man is going to be taken over by the yellow man, although I've never seen a Chinese person or a Japanese person or a Korean person that is actually yellow, but somehow or another, or these Irish, it always look like this Walking Dead kind of a thing with their hats and they're all kind of grubby stuff, but they're Catholic, so you know how the Catholics are. The popes are trying to take over America, or the Chinese are trying to take over America. So the great fear of the period that Uncle Sam may be swallowed by foreigners. Make America great again. Kick them out. Build the wall someplace, somewhere, wherever you need to. And maybe if you're lucky, because it's not very fun labor, you can get the Chinese and you can get the Irish to build the wall. Maybe. One way or another, if the actual artist would have cared at all about AP kids trying to get it reviewed, they would have put these in the right spot. So we have our Irish guy over in the East Coast and we have our Chinese guy over here on the West Coast. So I did that for you. So if you see this cartoon, don't get thrown off. The Chinese aren't on the East Coast. And the Irish aren't on the West Coast. But we'll just flip it a little bit. But this is another word you need to have. You need to have the word nativism. Nativism is this kind of patriotism wrapped around a little bit of racism. The idea that there's a right type of people that should be in the United States, and it's only them that should be in the United States. It gets a little bit more complicated about that, but you need to have this word. It becomes almost kind of anger embedded too. This kind of like, we got to get these people out of our country. So the nativist in this cartoon will start to then swallow Uncle Sam, and eventually the Chinese will then swallow up the Irish. So this is then also the idea of this cartoon. This is another phrase you have to have. I love you. You marry me. Remember, these are phrases you have to be able to use when you're writing your short answers, your free response, or whatever you end up doing as a document-based question in this year or any other year. This was known as the Yellow Peril. In other words, America will be taken over eventually by these Chinese, these Asians, these Japanese. Later on in World War II, it'll play itself out. So part of the story then is not only are these people working to build these railroads, but the actual railroads are changing America, and they are changing America. They're giving us 4 different time zones. They're going to, because the railroads can't go like, because it used to be that actual time was based on high noon. High noon was going to be a time period of the day that you could put a stick, put a little string, weigh something heavy next to it. You can kind of make sure it's parallel and perpendicular. So whenever high noon was, whatever season of that year it was, it meant that it didn't cast a shadow in terms of this east to west kind of stuff. That would be high noon. Well, if you can take a look at some of these big cities, like Chicago is going to be so sprawled out, high noon could change by a number of minutes. And if you're going to have trains kind of using one track, they got to be able to kind of side pass each other. You can't have them smashing into each other. So eventually, Congress is going to adopt the four time zones that we have now, where we have the Pacific, the Mountain, the Central, and the Eastern time zones. 1 hour difference between each one of them. And in essence, they will also start to change America by giving land grants to these railroads. And the railroads can then turn around and do whatever they want with that land. They can sell that land. They can keep that land. They can do whatever they want. The land system was pretty simple. It was basically wherever the railroad went. So the railroad would often hug creeks, rivers, so they can get water. Because remember, these are steam-driven railroads, so they had to have access to water. And usually, right along rivers, you end up having kind of flatlands, and railroads love flatlands. That the federal government would give them 100 yards on either side of the railroad. So for most of these Midwestern cities, especially, downtown of the cities will basically be the most valuable land, and it'll be the land right next to the railroads, because that means you can get your transportation, get your supplies, you can get your stuff out to the rest of the world right down that middle spot. And then on either side of the actual railroad, north, south, or east, west, depending on how the railroad itself was going, the government would give you a checkerboard of 1 square mile. So in other words, 640 acres, and then you'd get every other mile. Let's say, for example, the actual orange. And then the in-between would be open for 160 acres of homestead, meaning you could get 4 homesteaders with their 160 acres, because there's 640 acres in a square mile. And then you'd have another mile that the railroad could own, and they could then sell that land. Especially if it's buttoned up in town, you could sell it at a pretty good penny. $10 an acre, $20 an acre, $100 an acre, whatever you wanted. And these would go for 10 miles on either side of the railroad, all along the railroad line. So all along the railroad line, you basically have land being given away to the railroads. In the northern area, they'd sometimes do it on 40 miles north and south of the railroads. So you can see a lot of the land is going to be given away to the railroads, and railroads will again show their thanks by often making these congressmen, senators, and House of Representatives part owners with stock in these railroads. Eventually, they give away so much land that it's equal to the entire country of France and Belgium put together. That's what they give away to the railroads in California. Now, if you just take a look at that, that in essence is Highway 5, I-5, and 99. Not right through there, but basically they're going to own some of the choicest land in the area. And guys like Leland Stanford are going to get incredibly rich off of this. So rich that he can become governor and then senator from California, and so rich that he can actually buy himself his own little university, Stanford University. That's pretty rich. So if you're that rich, I don't know why you got to look that grumpy. Of course, maybe he is that grumpy for real basic human reasons. Stanford University is actually going to be named officially Leland Stanford Jr. University. It's named after his son, Leland Stanford Jr., who died when he was 15, tuberculosis, I think. And so in honor of their son, they named this Stanford University after him. Starts the process in 1885, and it's open in 1891. And it used to be a place that is very expensive to go. Now it's really cheap. You can go there for like $10. So I'm told. All right, so we have these railroads. These railroads are going at each other, fast, and furious. They're getting paid for every single mile that they actually create. Now remember this. Every mile they get makes the Central Pacific, and that's going to be Leland Stanford, Crocker, and those guys, the Union Pacific. These guys are going to get rich. So they literally, I'm not joking, they purposely go past each other, and they actually overlap by miles and miles and miles and miles, and they then kind of try to get Congress to basically say, we're going to call it over here, and then the Central Pacific would be paid for all that, and the Union Pacific would basically lose all that money. And the Union Pacific is over there talking to their congressmen, their senators, who are part owners in their company. Hey, we're going to have it stop over here, and then the Central Pacific, we're going to have to lock up, we're going to have to join it. And then the Central Pacific is going to lose all the money over here. So they honestly raced past each other. And then they decided to actually put it down there in Promontory, Utah. And they eventually get the two of them to join together, and that's where that golden spike is going to be driven. Now, remember, in the writing, you can have supporting details. They don't have to be tons of supporting details, but there got to be some supporting details. Thomas Hutchinson was a Tory. You've got to be able to name drop. You've got to be able to use some of these supporting details, including sometimes dates. So this first Transcontinental Railroad will be solidified. The golden spike will be set in yin yang year of 1869. Remember yin yang? We've talked about this. Like in 1619 is going to be the year that we have slaves and democracy brought to Virginia. 69. They're actually the same number. Now, these railroads were literally north-south laying on top of each other. So these railroads, in essence, were told to move back. So we have our joining at Promontory, Utah. So these railroads are no longer laying on top of each other, but it helps you with the idea of the year 69. So 1869, don't even. 1869, these two railroads are now no longer laying on top of each other. They're finally going to get joined. In 1869, stop it. In 1869, they're now linking the country together. It is also the same year that the Suez Canal is finished, if you really want to kind of show off your knowledge, in 1869. 1869, these railroads not only are now going to be done, they're going to be paid all kinds of money. In today's money, this is like incredible money. I mean, we're talking $64 million, $53 million, which really is not that much money. I mean, I got at least that much right here. 69 million, 64 million, 53 million. I got all of it. I'm a teacher. We're rich. So rich. But if you actually factor for inflation, for example, and Andrew Carnegie basically came over and started working for, not much in the 1862 time period, you actually factor for inflation, it could be pretty big money. We're talking like billions of dollars they give away, including the land. So there are all kinds of money out there. And these railroads are going to just get incredibly rich. And they will actually buy and sell congressmen. They will then often make themselves into senators like Leland Stanford was. So you're going to have these guys that are incredibly powerful. This is really our first big major corporations in America, the railroad states of America. And so you, in essence, have this political cartoon where these guys, in essence, are pontificating like senators of old, and they're giving a lot of hot air, but basically they run the country. All right. They also do some things where this area, I don't know if you recognize this area from a bird's eye view, if you've ever been like in a balloon way up or satellite looking way down. This is our beloved area. For those of you who are like in the Granite Bay area, it includes this area, Granite Bay. So if you're used to this area of the country, this is where we are. This is our spot. Now, if you also notice, we got Highway 65 coming this way and Highway 80 going this way. So in essence, it's ironic because those two highways actually parallel railroads, if you've ever noticed. So if you take Roseville and focus on a little bit of a tighter area, this is like the downtown Roseville. And that was a railroad given by the Central Pacific, later on the actual Pacific Railroad, and thus Pacific Street is right along in this area. And if you actually were ever down this way, you'll notice that one of the railroads comes down by Roseville High School and goes that way. The other railroad kind of comes down the same place. It's the same railroad, but then it turns and you can go up either to Reno or Sacramento. Got some options. For this, long before Roseville was called Roseville, we were known as Junction City, or sometimes simply Junction, because this was the junction of where north-south railroads would connect to east-west railroads and then go down to San Francisco, or go up to Reno. But basically, this is where it all kind of came together, Junction City. And hopefully you would actually know to turn one way or the other, because if you didn't, then there could be an accident. So this is known as Junction City. We now know it as Roseville, and you have to say it that way, Roseville, beloved Roseville. But if you've also been around Roseville for a while and you try to sneak in the back way to go down to Antelope High School, you can come up to this little road down here called PFE. Lived there for years. Started teaching in 1990. Didn't know what PFE was until I did a little bit of research on it. PFE actually was named after what was known as the Pacific Fruit Express. And it was a ice company down there and a fruit ice company area, so that they would basically load up all the fruit that had been grown up in the Auburn area, Loomis area, kind of Rockland area, and they'd take the fruit and they'd put it on these refrigerated box cars, and they would then load it with a bunch of ice and they'd send it across the country. PFE, Pacific Fruit Express. So our little Roseville area is going to be influenced by this, but technology is not just affecting railroads in this time period, it's affecting all kinds of things. Remember Henry Clay and his whole idea of, hey, I'm going to have the West but with the actual South, and we can control stuff? Well, technology is changing everything, including farming in general. And so technology is not just bringing us the railroad and steam engines, it's also going to bring us all kinds of different things. So let's just keep this in mind as we're talking about this. It used to be in this industrial revolution, pre-revolutionary, everything's done by hand. you and your sons get out there and you cut all the wheat, you size it out, and in maybe 300 hours, you're going to get 100 bushels. Then all of a sudden, because of guys like John McCormick, who comes up with his McCormick Reaper, think of the Grim Reaper. A Reaper is in essence going to be the guy that has that side. Well, the McCormick Reaper, he came up with an idea of just having it on two wheels. They've been pulled by a pulley, so as the actual wagon goes along, it will change this McCormick Reaper, and the Reaper will then have all these sides. It goes, and they basically just cut it. In other words, you could have a couple people within a very little bit of time, within 40 hours, you could basically do the work of what used to take 300 hours. And then later, as we get even more stuff like the gasoline tractors of the time period, you're going to be able to maximize this. Instead of having all those horses that often eat the wheat and eat the corn and eat the stuff, you can actually have 100 bushels. I mean, you can do this stuff really fast. And the cold seal plows are going to allow you to cut into that turf, and you can start to make your little turf house. And so what you have all through this time period is some amazing stuff happening, but most of it is often steel. And so into this mix is going to come Andrew Carnegie, and he's going to be one of our robber barons because the railroads are going to be made on steel, and he's going to be the biggest steel maker out there. So Andrew Carnegie, and they're often later on going to be, John D. Rockefeller. Pardon my, I'll hide down here for a second. John D. Rockefeller will be the other guy in this time period who is going to bring about the oil industry, and eventually all of these guys are going to need to use money coming from banks, and that's going to be J.P. Morgan. These are the triumvirate. These are the holy three of the robber barons you need to know long term. You got to have Andrew Carnegie, you got to have John D. Rockefeller over there, and you got to have J.P. Morgan right there. You got to have these guys long term. So steel, oil, money, banks. They got the banks. So it's Alexander Hamilton all over again. Andrew Carnegie was a great philanthropist. Andrew Carnegie, if you did your reading or actually watched the movie, he in essence was a guy who came straight from Scotland. His dad basically didn't get any more money. They could barely feed their own people anymore. Comes over in the Civil War time period and starts working as an operator for the telegraph system. And he was actually known as a smooth operator because a smooth operator was one who would go boop, 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 and do it in such a way that when it was converted to Morse code into actual letters, it was easy to read for most chord person. I was going to do my next lecture in Morse code, and you can figure it out. It'd be like a learning kind of thing. You're learning history and Morse code all at the same time. Well, Andrew Carnegie, for the most part, came over as this young man. He is a true, I'm sorry, again, the coronavirus, I think. One way or another, he is a true self-made man. Came over with almost nothing, worked his tail off, made something of himself, invested his money, ultimately became one of the wealthiest men in all of American history, Andrew Carnegie, and he then had that really cool beard that made people think, hey, Santa Claus. And he was Santa Claus in some ways because one of the things that he did was he created his vertical monopoly. So he came up with the idea that you could basically make something and then you could own your own railroad company so you never had to pay anybody else for your railroad stuff. You could actually own the iron ore mine and the coal mine, so you don't have to pay anybody else for that stuff. So vertical monopoly was one who basically controlled the stuff up and down, top to bottom, and he was actually able to do all kinds of stuff by never paying other people, well, not never, rarely having to pay other people for anything that his company made in the processing of steel. So he's also a guy that believes in the idea of philanthropy. He's going to be one of these people who comes up with what is known as the success gospel or the gospel of wealth. You got to be able to use those interchangeably. And that's the basic idea that God wanted me to have this money. And I then have to do something with it. I've got to do something good with it. It's not just that God wanted me to have the money so that I could have the money. God wanted me to have the money so that I could do what God wants me to do. And what God wants me to do for Andrew Carnegie is to support lots of different charities. The Carnegie Foundation is still out there working, doing all kinds of investigative stuff, all kinds of work with other countries. Carnegie Hall, one of our band people went there. This is what he did, but he also did big libraries. That was his big thing. He loved giving libraries for learning to other places around the country. So he'd often do matching funds. It wasn't like he just gave you a library. You had to be able to prove that your little town was willing to do something and would help then fund it. Like these guys. I don't know if you can tell down here at the bottom. You may recognize this. This is downtown Roseville. For those of you who've been Grand Bay Roseville kids all your life, you may have actually taken a tour of downtown Roseville, like my kids did when they were in school. Right down there in Roseville, right in the corner of the railroads, was a little part in town that was actually later on in 1912, with matching funds from the Carnegie stuff, they actually made the first ever library in all of Roseville. It is now the museum, the Carnegie Museum. It's right down there next to Roseville High School, right next to the railroad tracks, because the railroads owned everything. So this is Carnegie. And then the other robber baron in the time period they really need to know is John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil. And he, in essence, is going to be the guy who fine-tunes a lot of stuff. He has an alopecia issue because he loses all of his heirs, so those are all toupees, basically. He will become probably one of the wealthiest people in the history of the world that's not a king. I was doing some research, and they were talking about how some of the Roman empires had like equivalent of trillions of dollars. Well, of non-emperor status, John D. Rockefeller, in today's money, it's hard to say how inflation actually works because some things are cheaper, some things are more expensive, but he was worth upwards of about a fifth of $1 trillion, like $200 billion or so. When 1911, the Supreme Court came along and made him like chop up his business and sell it off a little bit, he then had to kind of like lose a little bit of money. And it's hard when you only have like $200 billion. I mean, you got it. It's tough. Believe me, I've had to struggle like that. I mean, when all of a sudden you have 200 billion and the government makes you chop up your company, and next thing you know, you may only have like $195 billion. I mean, it's tough. There's only so many coupon sales out there. Anyways, he is going to do the guy, he's going to come up with the idea of a horizontal monopoly. And the way to think about a horizontal monopoly is to literally just think of the horizon and all along the horizon, like everywhere you look, when you look for some place to go to get coffee, it's Starbucks, 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 and there's no other place to get coffee in town. That's a horizontal monopoly, meaning you actually control one part of the actual whole economic process. And so instead of being a vertical monopoly like Andrew Carnegie did, and there'd be other steel companies you could buy from, John D. Rockefeller did all kinds of things, from rebates, where they basically do kind of what Walmart does, saying to big companies, hey, I will buy your stuff, I will use your railroads, but you got to give me rebates back. In other words, you got to make it so cheap. Rockefeller was really well known for basically lowering the price so low that his competitors trying to compete with him would have to lower their price too, to the point where they could no longer make any money. And they just, and then you come in and like buy them up. The next thing you know, brand new little sign on it, Standard Oil, Standard Oil, Standard Oil, of which now it's Chevron. So when you see a Chevron, that's the descendant of John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. I also have Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's going to be the guy that is, if you've ever seen the musical Hello, Dolly, they talk about the Vanderbilts and the Astors and stuff. So he's a New York guy that's got all kinds of money all over the place. He's a railroad owner. In essence, if you're going to get in and out of Manhattan, you're going to use his railroads. So these guys are known as the robber barons. Again, the robber barons are very important. And then in a different lecture, we talk about the idea of they're making their money not necessarily off of them per se. It's not like JP Morgan is actually in his bank working every day all the time. It's not like Andrew Carnegie's actually pouring steel in and like molding it with his own hand. John D. Rockefeller is not, because then his toupee might start on fire when he's working with oil. So one way or another, these guys are working with labor. And so labor are going to be basically the euphemism, the word known for their workers. And again, if you ever see this little kind of in and out hat in a political cartoon, that means a laborer, because you would put these hats on to keep all the soot and the crap from falling on your head, starting your hair on fire. Start the paper hat on fire, then you can throw it off or throw it away at the end of the day. So you in essence have robber barons. These are in essence the guys who will be the multi-rich guys of this time period. These three that we need to know: Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan and his nose. So this is the era of mass corruption also. This money is going to have almost no rules on it for the longest of time, from 1870 to 1890. In 1890, finally, Congress passes the Sherman Antitrust Law, but they really don't even enforce it. So basically what this time period of the Industrial Revolution is, not only economic growth, vast economic growth, but it is time of vast corruption. Both parties are going to get involved. The corruption for the Republicans are going to be with big business. And so here you have Ulysses S. Grant, and he's hanging on to these corrupt rings. So a ring is basically where guys don't even know where to point the finger as to who actually started this whole corruption. He's got all those guys underneath. Cornelius Vanderbilt, this is a picture, political cartoon, of standing like the Colossus of Rhodes, meaning that to get into New York, you're going to be able to ride on his railroads. And then finally, the Democratic Party is going to have its corruption of its own. We'll talk about this in a while, and that's going to be Tammany Hall, who's basically going to use the Irish and later the Italian immigrants of New York to build a political machine off of. So this is not anything really unique to the Republicans and Democrats, but it is very much an American way of life. So this, in essence, is where we're going to be wrapping up this particular time period, with the Democrats and the Republicans kind of doing their stuff. So you got your donkey and you got your elephant. More to come. Corruption is a fun thing. And it's totally gone from America now. Just look at that $2.2 trillion package. There's no corruption in there anywhere for anybody's special interest, because everybody's moral now. We do it the right way.